Dear colleagues, dear friends, the ERSA Prize, the most prestigious prize awarded by this association, is a major label of excellence. The excellence ERSA stands for. It is a reward for those regional scientists at European level with outstanding contributions in terms of research and publications records, as well as in terms of contribution to society and to regional science community. It is awarded by ERSA based on the recommendation of an independent jury composed of 6 regional scientists, 5 members, and the chair, representing ERSA, 4 of them, and other supranational associations, 2 members. The independence of the jury is essential to ensure the objectivity and service in the best interest of regional science. This year, the jury was composed by Anne-Catherine Niebuhr, Diana Cibulschiene, Dominique Mignot, and myself as chair. On behalf of ERSA, Janet Colhayes for North America and Pedro Amaral for Latin America. The jury made proposals and the 7-name list of excellent regional scientists resulted. Then each member of the jury independently graded the candidates considering the criteria mentioned before. The overall, grades were very high, showing a strong competition, but of course we always have a number one. I changed please. And as always, we have a number one. So in the name of the ERSA Prize jury, let me introduce and sincerely congratulate Professor Michael Storper, the recipient of the 2025 ERSA Prize. From his impressive biography, we have selected the following. Michael Storper is professor of regional and international development at UCLA and professor of economic geography at the London School of Economics. He is the author of over 100 academic papers and 13 books. In 2014, Professor Storper was named by Thomson Reuters as one of the world's most influential scientific minds of the 21st century for his writings, being among the top 1% most cited in the field of social sciences. He is a fellow of the British Academy and in 2016, he received the Founders Medal from the Royal Geographical Society. Professor Storper, again, warm congratulations, and now I invite Professor Roberta Capello, the ERSA president, to offer the prize to you. Congratulations. Thank you.
Okay. So, and now we give the floor to Michael to see whether he is very good or as we were told.
Okay, I just need to find the slides. As I get started, let me just say, of course, thank you. You know, it's a deep honor, and I think, what I would say to the colleagues, but also especially, the younger people in the room, I see a lot with, for example, students, and they start out their careers, and we go different ways in life, right? There are different ways that we can interact. We can, we can go for power, and we can go for political influence or other like that. But what I think really moves me the most personally, and I see it in certain students, is when you get the recognition from your peers. And it's really, I think, the most, for someone like me, who's a researcher and a teacher, to have peer recognition is the thing that I care about the most, in addition to having my students like me. So it's really, from the bottom of my heart that I thank the committee and the colleagues here for recognizing the work. And so, in that spirit, as I get started, Roberta knows what I'm going to say. Yes, this is her fault, which is she and I dialogued about potential topics, and she said to me, choose the one that's most provocative of the ones that I had suggested. So here goes. You are all forewarned, and I think my close colleagues and students know, how I do this. So what I want to talk about is what I call Europe's geography problem. And it's an old and classical one, right, in economics and social science more generally, which is how to reconcile growth with equity, and, what's the European version of that. Okay, so the aim of my talk is to think about challenges that are facing researchers like ourselves that are concerned with regional dynamics in Europe. And the core of these challenges for me right now, or where I've gotten to in my research, is relationships between the geographical foundations of growth, innovation, and technological sovereignty, and several types of social and spatial inequalities. This is naked self-promotion, but really what it's about is another message to the younger researchers in the room, which is I'm giving a talk which is what I call a synthesis talk, meaning it's not a paper, but rather an attempt to string together and make a story out of different individual pieces of research that unfold over time, that are like building blocks. And I think that's kind of a thing that we do in our careers as we work on different problems, and then we sort of pull back and say, is there a picture here? Or is there like a bigger agenda that's motivating me? And so this one has a lot of pieces into it, and I'm trying to create a narrative for you that I hope is convincing. And so I have six questions I want to touch on here. One is, why do we have so many regions in Europe that are trapped in their development? A second is, are European cities too small? A third is inter-country convergence in Europe promoting intra-country divergence? A fourth is, did European regionalist thinking and policies contribute to Europe's growth and innovation deficit? Fifth is, are we too focused on place inequalities and not enough on people inequalities? And finally, can we get going again by expanding world-class clusters? And I mean spatial clusters there. And at what price would this come for inequalities between people and places in Europe? So it's that interface that I want to look at real quickly. First, just like a background, I think you all know this, but Europe is in many ways a typical case of world regional economic dynamics. Big cities have substantially higher average incomes and job growth than elsewhere in our region. We have skill-biased technological change that's coupled to strong agglomeration economies for the third industrial revolution. The skilled people mostly sort up the urban hierarchy today. That's the internal migration question. And there are growing gaps in housing prices between the big sort of superstar-y cities and elsewhere. There's depopulation or growing per capita income gaps to many other regions, except for a few privileged, touristy, or upper-class second home places. And this is kind of like a post-1980 world, but it's really strongly a post-2000 world, and it's really radically different from the post-war 20th century world. And in the world that we're living in, we have these three major kinds of inequality that are combining and interacting. Between the educated and the less educated, between skilled, mostly big metro regions and elsewhere, and in wealth accumulation between the people, now multiple generations, that have been in certain urban housing markets and those who have not. So these are three big inequalities that are kind of like attached to this overall urban and regional arrangement that's been coming into being in the last few decades. Here's a, we know for Europe, it's actually quite typical in this respect, is that the people go, they're going more and more to the high income regions, and that's just like China or just like the United States. But there are specificities of Europe, and when I think here, I'm really thinking it's sort of like big world economic regions, China, Europe, and America as the three that I'm going to kind of think about, with apologies to people from other parts of the world, which I also find interesting, but you can't do everything. And I think so European specificities are, for one, lower tolerance for wage inequality than elsewhere in the world. That is maintained through regulated labor markets, and therefore we have generally lower income inequality than China or America. We have more public goods and spatial redistribution of public goods than in most other parts of the world. We have more aging. We have sluggish economic and income growth in the 21st century compared to the other big two parts of the world. We unfortunately never became a key player in the innovations of the third industrial revolution, and we are unfortunately, it looks like we're losing out in the fourth, mostly in the AI race. We also have a lot of middle-sized city regions by world standards. We're physically small, meaning that we have lower distances than, say, North America or China, so we have a potential for more spatial interaction, especially in the well-served European core. And we have an active continent-wide regional policy, the cohesion policy, and individual countries also tend to do a lot of policy compared to other parts of the world. And what I'm going to try and sort of argue is that most of these things are related to one another. It's the good, bad, and the ugly. They're part of a package. First of all, regional development traps. Andreas Diemer, Simone Imarino, Andres Rodriguez-Pose, and myself, we did some work supported by the Commission, and we tried to adapt the concept of a middle income trap from international development economics to the regional scale here in Europe. And the basic idea of that concept, as I think most of you know, is that there's a kind of like a standard problem in trajectories of development, which is that it's relatively easy to start out and grow fast, and then many countries in the world, they hit a stagnation period, and most of them never get out of it. And in the last 100 years, only a small handful of countries has gone from being poor to being rich. Almost all of the world that has done anything has gone from being poor to being middle income, and then it stays there. Okay, so we thought this might be interesting to look at in the European regional context, because we have a lot of territories that have been added to the European Union that are mostly post-Soviet territories, and we thought that might be something that would be going on in them. And we want to see also what was going on in certain other parts of the original, like European 15 countries that might have been hit by shocks, and to see how these things all worked out. And actually what we found is that the stagnation that's typical statistically of middle income countries is unfortunately pretty widespread in Europe. And it's not just at regions that are at the middle income level, but that it hits regions of all levels, and that a lot of it's pretty durable. We did these rolling 15-year averages, and we were very distressed to learn that there's a lot of Europe that got into stagnation and isn't getting out of it. And it's up and down the income hierarchy. That's just a quick map of, we've had different measures. You can look at our article, you'll see what we found, but point is, we found a lot of this stuff. We know that growth is important. What does all this mean for convergence? So what we were doing was tracking regions over time in relationship to their past, and it provides us a different agenda from the standard cross-section that you get, even cross-sections compared over time of income or production. So bluntly, in other words, if you have one region, like region A, as I call it in the slide, and we have a lot higher income or productivity than region B, but if both are rather stagnant, why should we actually care so much about convergence? Maybe we should actually be trying to emphasize getting growth back in both of them, and maybe we shouldn't obsess about getting a higher rate of growth in the lower income regions, which would be the standard convergence focus that a lot of theory tells us to pay attention to. Getting back to a positive and equal rate of growth in all these regions, though, right, would be, of course, a strategy, but the consequence would be that it would drive divergence because they start out at really different levels. So there's an issue there for both regional theory, but also regional policy thinking about what we should do faced with this widespread stagnation problem that we discovered here in Europe. My judgment is that we should pay more attention to growth. Okay, so this gets us actually to what we have as spatial foundations of growth here in Europe. And you can see my attempt at a provocative question, which is, are our cities too small? So here I'm going to come to comparison. So with Enrique Garcilaso and Joaquin Oliveira, we're starting some research now where we're looking at the spatial structure of contributions to growth in Europe as compared to the US. We haven't published it, and of course it will also be interesting to do with respect to China. Most of you probably know that like urban productivity premiums are higher in the USA than in Europe. They have been for a long time. And when they're benchmarked to their own national or continental economies, American cities have higher wages and higher productivity gaps to their national benchmark than cities do in Europe on average. But it's not just that. It's that growth is more spatially distributed in Europe than it is in the USA. There's more middle-sized cities in Europe, and it takes more urban areas to get a given share of continental growth in Europe than it does in America. So if we put these two observations together, we can simply ask whether Europe is shorting itself on the urban foundations of a potential growth rate. If it's just got growth that's too spread out, too divided up spatially to get the big bang that we expect cities to give us. And here's some of the numbers that Joaquin and Enrique have been developing. We do a comparison, you can see down there, of a kind of abbreviated Europe, the Europe of 15 plus the UK, compared to the USA. So they're roughly the same size in population. But you'll see that in the functional urban areas, they're not too different. The difference is how many functional urban areas it takes to get different shares of growth. So for example, here you can see that in the 20 top functional urban areas by growth contributions in Europe, you get 30% of the population contributing to 51% of the GDP growth. In the US, they have 54% of the population, and they're contributing 68% of the growth. And you can see the structure is really different. That if you take the four mega cities, so that's Paris and London here, and LA and New York there, and then you go beneath them, you see that in Europe you have only one functional urban area between 5 and 10 million people compared to 9 in the United States, and so on and so forth. So the structure of how growth and productivity are allocated, the sort of spatial allocations are really different. Same thing for population. All right, so just kind of keep that in mind, that we have development traps, we have a growth problem, and we have growth very spatially dispersed in Europe. So now let's come back to convergence. As we know, we've put a lot of energy into this giant convergence effort, member state convergence as part of the European Union, and it's worked in the sense that, we've gradually created a single market, due in part to the active cohesion policy, and there's been large-scale income convergence across member states. And we've also done better here in Europe on rescuing rust belts than the USA, as shown in the work by Gagliardi and Moretti on the world's rust belts. So we have this giant convergence experiment, and I think we can all, draw great satisfaction from that as a deliberate experiment in economic integration that is working in that sense. The problem, though, is that there are some things hidden under that story that are maybe more worrisome. For one, the big cities are delivering the big cities are delivering most of the inter-member state convergence. Like a lot of Eastern European countries have dynamic metro areas that lift their national per capita incomes relative to the EU average. But intra-country divergence is growing in a lot of those same countries, especially in those accession countries, because most growth is concentrated in their capital or larger metro regions. So some of Europe's convergence between states is a bit of an optical illusion because metros in the East are catching up and pulling their national income averages upward. But if you look at it more granularly, the picture is actually of quite a lot of spatial inequality. So once that process is over of bringing the cities of the European periphery up and having them do what they can do at the size and at the size and the kind of improved productivity we can give them for that size, the underlying problem of divergence between metros and everywhere else is going to be with us, and it might even intensify, because this is probably a one-off. So we can see that, we can compare that to the US case of convergence to divergence. So remember, the US had convergence between the states of America quite a long time ago. It did it roughly in the 1960s. And what happened, this is work that we did on the American urban system, where we divided all the commuting zones into 6 groups based on their income trajectories. And you don't have to know a lot of detail of this, but you can just eyeball the fact that the top line, which is the superstar metro areas, it's roughly 17 large metropolitan areas. They're 3.5% of American commuting zones. They have 32% of American population and 45% of American economic output in those 3.5% areas. They're the superstar, high-performing metro areas. They converged toward the rest of the system from 1940 to 1980, and then they just took off, while the rest of them converged toward the mean. So that is very likely a time bomb hidden here in Europe once we get the one-off of the accession countries done. So let's put the size problem together with the one-time convergence boost with development traps. Just kind of assemble all those things. If we were to try to get more growth in Europe, which we need, wouldn't it require that the second-tier cities become bigger in order to become more productive and more innovative? But wouldn't that drive interregional inequality up in ways that we might not like? Okay, so now let's kind of like extend that story a little bit more into my fourth point, which is Europe's growth and innovation deficit. And I think it's on everybody's minds, right? The Draghi report kind of put it onto the radar screen of the public. I think most people in this room, we've been thinking about it for a really long time because it's kind of our business to think about it. We know that there's all these kind of structural causes of Europe's growth and innovation deficit. Like, our standard productivity is actually pretty good. Hourly productivity in standard old legacy industries, we're highly productive. Our labor force participation and working time are low compared to the US and China. And that's probably a combination of voluntary preferences for other values and lifestyles, and maybe involuntary. For some people, it doesn't pay to work. Skills are mismatched, and inside or outside dynamics in labor markets. Some of it's also probably due to the relative absence of job-rich new industries, meaning the super innovative industries that have high wages and high entrepreneurial rents that come from having major new innovations. We know that what those do is they change the occupational wage and income structure in radical ways. And researchers have now mapped this out empirically to show that that's exactly the main difference between, say, America and Europe. So this is an innovation deficit, basically, right? And it's linked to a preference for legacy firms and industries. Policy plays a big role in that, both European policy and national policy. We have rigid labor market rules that hinder, fast scaling up and commercialization of new inventions. It's too difficult to start up a firm, even today, and there's no cross-European environment for startuppers. They have to negotiate all these different rules in spite of it all being the EU. and it's extremely hard and discriminatory toward small, young startuppers. And of course, we have a bank-oriented conservative financial system that hinders commercializing new ideas. All right, so that's kind of like mostly, you might call it non-spatial factors. But I also think there's a spatial contribution to our innovation deficit. And specifically, it's that we've probably not got the right analysis of what causes different kinds of innovation. We've had a lot of policy effort that has tried to use a combination of, or kind of an interface between regional policy and innovation and research policy to get Europe to be a so-called, first-class, world-leading innovation region. Lisbon, Horizon 2020, and so and so. The regional component, as most of you know, was based on regional innovation systems that we were supposed to promote through policy, and that was based on a core, theoretical concept of smart specialization, where we would basically build on the skills of the region and kind of inch them gradually into related areas so that they could supposedly capitalize on their existing skills and then become more innovative in a kind of efficient and realistic way. So the idea there was that all regions could become innovative and all regions would contribute to an excellent world-class Europe. And this is sort of a gradualist or evolutionary as well as spatially distributed way of thinking about innovation. That's just a chart. You all know this stuff about all the interfaces between the policy. That's a map of smart specialization, regional innovation system projects that were retained and funded by the European Union, by the cohesion policy. But the result is, frankly, not very good, right? Europe is a second mover, right? The US and China have a much higher proportion of radical or first mover innovations than Europe does. They are going into new areas that are not outgrowths of what they used to do. And it's reflected in the profile of their exports. America has more what are called roamer exports that are based on distinctive new products and varieties than Europe, which has more Ricardo exports, which are basically quality differences of old legacy products. The USA and China scale the new products and varieties up and commercialize them rapidly so that by the time we here in Europe are waking up to it, it's already done. And the markets have already been seized and you can't break into them because of the scale of the companies that have already dominated them in these two other regions of the world. So the economic properties of first mover innovation are really different from second mover. Like I said a minute ago, they create big new companies. They attract huge capitalization. They generate these giant Schumpeterian rents, and they generate a very large demand for high-skilled labor, which of course introduces inequalities into the income distribution, but it does generate the income. So you get these two kinds of inequalities that also emerge from this success story. One is you get a lot of income inequality, and you get a lot of spatial inequality because first mover industries are highly clustered in rather large metropolitan areas. And that leads me back to the point I made a few minutes ago, which we don't have a lot of those very large metropolitan areas. Okay, so that's just showing you some data that we've been working on in a team in London. Here's the breakthrough innovations of Europe versus the US, and here's the incremental innovations. And the gap in the breakthrough is just huge, right? And pretty much incontrovertible. So this leads to now kind of to try and tie it all together is the US innovation geography is really different from Europe's innovation geography. And this is actually a topic that Riccardo Crescenzi and Andres and I started researching like 2007 or 8, way back then. And we're doing this comparison of the innovation geography of America and Europe, and then of India and China. And basically, the second-tier metro, and that analysis that we sort of discovered back then is that, and it's been confirmed, is that the second-tier metros of America, those with roughly 6 to 10 million people, are the major commercialization metros for new US technologies. That's work done by Chris Esposito of UCLA. Some of them are also what we call science metros, but not all of them. The big skill of these metros is that they are the places where the technologies get commercialized, scaled up, and implemented, and new markets created. So Europe has not reconciled innovation with spatial spreading. Spatial inequality is lower than in the US, but here's the problem. It's at the great price of becoming a continent that has a huge innovation deficit, contributing to our growth and sovereignty deficits and to our widespread development traps. We've got a lot wrong. Okay, so Europe's at a crossroads, right? I think we all know that, but I don't think we agree on what we need to do in this crossroads, and I want to make a pitch here that there's a very, very important spatial issue in our crossroads. Okay, so this is no longer just about economics. Europe is losing its ability to be sovereign. You can read the news every day and you'll know what that's all about, right? In the contentiousness over who gets to control technologies, both civilian and defense. The benevolent relationship to America is over, and both China and the US intend to wield the power that they have from their technological success. So the regional foundations, how do they figure into that? What's the role? I'm going to just say real quickly that I'm going to skip over this point because I want to get to the last one, which is think about this. So in light of the things that I've been saying here, we have development traps, we have undersized city regions, we have problems with gradualist philosophies that underlie a lot of our policy construction. Then it might follow that Europe either needs more, bigger, better performing clusters to increase in innovation, or alternatively, if it's not that, that we have to find some other way to raise innovation in a spatially dispersed way than what has been tried with RAS and smart specialization, which, to use very strong words, have not succeeded. So let's explore this first idea. There are some highly performing city regional innovation clusters here in Europe. They are not world-class in the American or Chinese way, but they are significantly more innovative and high income when benchmarked to the rest of Europe. Most of them are located in parts of Europe that perform better than European average on innovation incomes, things like the Nordics or Austria or Switzerland, as detailed by my colleagues Neil Lee and David Soskis, who study these issues. What about Germany? That's, of course, a possible exception, right? It's a big country with a relatively distributed and high level of innovation. But as we all know and are discovering, Germany is mostly legacy innovation. It did very well with it, but Germany is not doing very well in the fourth industrial revolution and didn't contribute all that much to the third. So, and of course, there's a few European companies we could think about, like, the famous ASML example, that are top ranked, right? But they're niche operations and their clusters are relatively small, especially compared to the companies and clusters that would be the equivalent in America. Okay, so now, how do we interpret this evidence? This is really my it's my last big point here, but I think it's kind of a wrap-up point, which is, how do we interpret what we know about European success? And I find it really interesting, there's debates among colleagues about those examples. So Denmark and Austria, right? In other words, are these examples, these success or relative success examples, are they evidence that Europe can have a more spatially dispersed, less regionally unequal innovation geography, and that what we really need, to put it a little bit more bluntly, is more Viennas and Copenhagens, right? And that if we could scale that up to Europe, then Europe would take its place in the world, and that's what we need to do. But actually, it's pretty hard to interpret what we're looking at there. And I haven't done any formal analysis on it, but I think Joaquin and Enrique and I are kind of reaching in that direction as we move with our research, which is, if you look at Copenhagen or Vienna, they're classic primate cities, right? Each of them is a third of its national population. They are, of course, small countries in an open continental economy. So you can flip that point on its head and say, well, they're actually small and evidence of spatial dispersion. Modeling, rank size distributions, gets you into all these complex technical issues, as you know, of what you use as the reference market area and what city hierarchy you're talking about. But here's just my guess about it. From a comparative continental perspective, which is the one I'm kind of caring about here, they're actually really small. Copenhagen and Vienna are highly productive, rich, relatively innovative urban centers. They're primates in their own countries, but what they aren't is big or even close to being big in world terms, right? And so it's unclear that they can play the role in Europe that, say, the Boston, San Franciscos, Houstons do in the comparison urban system of America. So to move Europe upward in terms of world-class innovation, all of this points to the need for more absolute size of research and commercialization clusters, in addition, of course, to all the structural reforms that will actually enable our clusters to function well. More innovation in larger clusters, though, and here's the huge challenge to us, it's a strong tension with spatial inequality and income equality, which are values that are very dear to European societies and, of course, to our political stability and cohesion. So, what to do? I don't know. I know that with a group we're trying to think about this, but I would say this kind of really as the last point, which is the current kind of policy setups that we have are not based on any kinds of credible commitments to change anything. The way that cohesion policy works, the way that horizon policy works, is it's basically redistributive in a kind of formulaic way. And a turn, as is being debated now, to giving block grants to countries would simply give them back to the same interest groups that have done what they've already done, which is more legacy companies, more paying off the different regions to do what they do, and we are going to likely go nowhere. And I'm very frightened about it as a researcher and as a European citizen, believe it or not, I am. So I think what we need to do is really start as researchers. And here I think it's an interaction between spatial economists, regional scientists, and our friends in political science and political economy to start thinking about what the political structures would be that could bring about credible commitments to new forms of growth and the spatial foundations of them. That means getting coalitions of the willing to make coalitions to do things and to spend whatever monies there are in ways that are outcome-based and not process-based. Because all we have now is process. And it doesn't get us to, and we just don't, and we miss our goals. So, okay, I've tried to be provocative, and I hope I've done a good job there. And the idea of the provocation isn't to, play the kind of the person who is, bringing the warnings, but rather to stimulate research, right? These are, for us, incredibly interesting questions that involve theoretical development, they involve data development, but to do that, we as a collectivity, as a group here, we need to start rethinking about the questions that we're asking, right? And not go along in a kind of path-dependent way as if the reality of what we've been thinking about for the last 20 years was going to get us out of the very deep problems that we're facing. So it's in that spirit that I've tried to give this talk, and thank you very much for listening, and most especially, thank you so much for giving me this very, very honored recognition.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Is it working? No.
We don't do questions, or do we?
Oh, we do. Sorry, if it works.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this insightful presentation. I'm sure some of you will have one or two urgent questions. Please, you come here. You have to come here, probably. We don't have the microphone.
Thank you very much for Michael for the fantastic keynote. Davide from Cambridge. So my question is, it's a fantastic speech because it talks to the long-standing equity efficiency trade-off and possibly that we probably focus so much on equity, etc. The question is, you somehow suggest that one of the solutions is to move to more concentration of economic activities, let's say in cities. Can you see a way where this is can go hand in hand with addressing socioeconomic inequalities? Let's assume that it's people and it is not places. Can you see a way where, or examples where like the concentration of the disruptive innovations in cities has been helped or accompanied with the policies to make sure everyone is on board?
Thank you, Davide. We collect some other questions. Peter, you have to come here because we are recorded.
Thank you very much, Michael. It is a fact that Europe is a second mover in terms of innovativeness. It's also a fact that Europe has less big metropolitan areas and big industrial clusters compared to China and the US. It's not yet a fact that the two phenomena are necessarily correlated. And I was wondering what would be the theoretical, conceptual, empirical background for assuming what you did, that the low level of metropolitan density in Europe might necessarily be linked to the lack of innovativeness. You mentioned one example, ASML, the world-known chip technology and the chip production factory that is located in a small village. You can hardly find it on the Google map. How come?
No? Okay, so please, if you want to just reply shortly.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with Peter's question. Actually, Peter, I think there's really abundant literature that shows that there's a very strong link between metropolitan size and the level and type of innovation output. The spatial innovation literature that's actually, I would say, its principal descriptive finding. Causally, there's quite a lot of literature on why those findings might be related to a size. So I actually am pretty confident that that link is a causal one. And that's why I'm worried about the spatial allocation structure of Europe. I think what that literature suggests is that it's divided up in a way that is having a causal effect of depressing innovation output. Okay, so, but that is, of course, it's not an absolute consensus around that topic, therefore a great subject for more research. We, some of us at LSE have been doing some further research on innovation hotspots in Europe, and it tends to confirm that they're smaller and less innovative and more legacy than in bigger places. And then to David's comment, I think attacking the two kinds of inequalities, I actually think I'm more optimistic about interpersonal inequalities than spatial inequalities. I think a lot of American interpersonal inequalities are actually not causally related to American innovation output or economic performance, meaning that there is distortions in labor markets now that are actually overcompensating some of the occupations that are related to innovation output, and that wage moderation could be achieved here, in particular because we do quite well on decommodifying a lot of aspects of life that in America you have to pay for. And so we can actually probably do pretty well on, I'm not saying we can hold inequality to where we are now, Because a lot of the inequality, the absence of inequality that we have here is simply because we have an old economy, right? That's not a good form of keeping, it's not a good way to keep inequality down. Spatial inequality, I'm frankly more worried about in the sense of the size distribution of metropolitan areas encounters, you know, a 2,000-year-old urban system here in Europe that built, of course, in a path-dependent way from, you know, a past with much higher trade costs and national boundaries, and how a continent like Europe could achieve large-scale spatial reallocation is, I find it absolutely intellectually fascinating. I think probably, you know, I want to read more history, but I do think at the very least, we should be thinking about it and thinking about what we can or should do and whether our policies have the right targets.
Thank you, Michael. We have to move on. Thank you very much. No, you rest here because the local organizers have a gift.
Michael, on our behalf, from the local organizing committee, first of all, we would like to congratulate you on the award. And also, as local organizers, we would like to thank you very much for being here and for delivering this great speech. We have a small present for you. It is actually the 2,000 years of the Greek democracy. It is from the Hellenic Parliament, recently published because we had a celebration for the 200 years, and this is a small gift for us. Thank you very much for being with us.